The French women's national team is currently working with a new manager, Hervé Renard. But what do we know about him and what do we expect him to do with the team? So let's talk about it. This managerial change for the women's national team, for the French women's national team, has been coming now for a year or two, if not a few years even, since the appointment of Corinne Diacre. The former manager was unable to win any major trophies with the French team, nor did she have a good relationship on a personal level with any of her players. She was accused by pretty much every single player in her locker room to have been abusive and maintaining a very toxic environment, with the captain, Renard, and some of the other players announcing that if this does not change going into the World Cup, we are simply stepping down from the French national team duty. The French Federation was alerted. They put a committee together. A few weeks later, the committee decided on the removal of Corinne Diacre. They also had the job and the duty of appointing a new head coach, which by now we know is Hervé Renard. His appointment came a little bit as a surprise, considering that this manager has never ever worked or managed a women's national team, a women's team, or ever worked in the women's game in general. But not so unpredictable, considering that he is a manager of the international level, as well as him having expressed interest in coaching the women's team over the last few years. And I think before we jump into what we expect to see from him on the pitch and what his resume tells us, I think his appointment holds a lot of responsibilities. Not only is he coming in to tactically switch some things up, try to get a trophy in the French cabinet and handle all that stuff on the field, he's coming in to rebuild a lot of relationships between the federation and the team. There's also a lot of relationships that he needs to foster within the team and within the players, including players that have stepped away or have been excluded from the national team for the last few years or so. His work includes changing the environment, the culture, the workplace, the expectations, the atmosphere. It's a lot more than just changing what's going to happen on the pitch and how the planning on the training session is going to take place. Almost like the puzzle pieces have just been scattered all around, and he has this massive responsibility of putting it all together and putting it all together with some very high expectations, and rightfully so. His resume does kind of support and point a good finger to the fact that he can come in into kind of like a rough environment and be able to do something, and most importantly be able to win a trophy. In 2012, he was able to win the African Cup with Zambia, and then 3 years later, in 2015, he did the same with Ivory Coast. No other manager has been able to do that, win 2 African Cups with 2 different nations. In 2018, he took Morocco to their first ever World Cup in 20 years. And in 2022, he also took Saudi Arabia to their first ever World Cup since 1994. So his resume in terms of coming in and kind of having a shift change, taking a team into a different gear, is pretty good and pretty consistent over the last decade or so. Now this new opportunity presents itself, and so far he's doing pretty damn good. In fact, let's talk about his staff. Something quite problematic is that during the reign of Corinne Diacre, there was only 2 other assistant managers. That is it. One for strength and conditioning, and the other one as a goalkeeper coach. That is it. The coaching staff was made up of just 3 people. I think that is absolutely ridiculous to even think about. I'm not sure if this was a Corinne Diacre decision or if it was the Federation decision or even both of them agreeing on it. Wouldn't be surprised for it to be the latter, where they both agreed on it. Obviously, the Federation backed her up for as long as they did, so it would not be a surprise to see them be, okay, you can definitely just have 2 other assistant managers as your entire coaching staff. But the first thing that Hervé Renard came and did was appoint 6 other assistant managers, 2 of which are just assistant coaches, one of which is also a data analyst. He has now also assigned a completely just separate goalkeeper coach, and then 2 strength and conditioning coaches. Hervé Renard has been there for a month and has already been able to put together a bigger and stronger managing staff than Corinne Diacre was able to put for the last 4 years. The medical staff has also been changed, which is not surprising considering he's brought in 2 different strength and conditioning coaches, different than the ones that were working under Corinne Diacre. The admin and the operational staff is still unchanged, and I would assume that's a little bit more of the federation to handle than him specifically. But already changes have been made for the managing staff, the medical staff, and it's looking like a very bright start, literally a weekend. Just at the end of his first week, he also made his first call-up for the French national team. His first call-up looked very promising to me. They obviously had Colombia and Canada in that April window, which is going to be the only FIFA window for him to practice and be able to have games before the World Cup. The squad included some very young, promising players to be given a chance. Those that did deserve a call-up considering their most recent performances. Most importantly, some of these midfielders that absolutely did not deserve to be on the team, like Bilbao and Torrent. Both Bilbao and Torrent were actually able to get caps over 50 times since 2017, which not only is probably the most undeserving capping for these midfielder players, and I say undeserved because their performances were way below par on the national team and before getting called up to the national team, and just the whole tenure in the past few years. Their performances and their abilities is nothing where the French team should be. And that's not to take a hit at them, but they just simply aren't the players that need to be getting called up to the French national team. Lossamer obviously involved back in the fact that she was excluded for the past few years. I think she just must hold some kind of ridiculous amount of resentment, because to be able to have wasted a player's peak time on the national team just because your ego was too hurt is, it's wild. He appointed his staff, he appointed his medical team, and most importantly had his first call-up. So how did the next two games go? Both of which were victories. It was a 5-2 win over Colombia after going down 2-0 on set pieces, followed after a 2-1 victory over Canada. What I saw in these two games is the exactly classic Renard that we have seen over the past few years with the teams that he has worked in Africa, and what he will likely be doing with this French team. Renard plays a very aggressive pressing style. He likes a very highly mobile, strong midfield group. He wants that midfield to have an aggressive display. He wants to control their own midfield and control the opposition's midfield, and that's really where his major threats come from. There's a lot of managers that like to build from the back or like to defend or whatever it is that they like to do with the back line, where their major threats are in the back line. There's other managers that love to have their wingers get involved, love to have their wingers kind of play with the inverted fullbacks. They make sure that their threats are on the wings. There's other managers that want to make sure that their strikers and attackers are getting involved in the build-up. There's so many different threats that a manager can impose. But with Hervé Renard here, he really likes to focus on the midfield, and that's always where a lot of his danger comes from. With Morocco and Saudi Arabia, his pressing tactics were extremely effective and efficient with the movement of them. However, they did struggle in the games that they would lose and go down, or possibly from those that were equally just as aggressive or a little bit more conservative in their style of play. What was clear to me is that even when he'd come up against a team that's just equally as aggressive or conservative or kind of fall short against those teams, it's not usually so much of his tactical work. It's usually his players being outplayed purely because of just level and talent to the opposition. But I think coming in now to a French team, one, in my humble opinion, I think there's a lot more talent in the French women's national team when it comes to pure skill and grit from the players, like just the players level, compared to the players that he was working with and Saudi Arabia. He's got far more talent, he's got far more skills, he's got far more youth to work with, and he's got a lot of options to be able to put together different kinds of midfields. Kenza Dali, Emile Mazri, absolutely completely wasted under Diacra, in my eyes, are some of the most efficient balancing midfielders right now. Taletti is another player that I think is going to be very important in the Hervé Renard era. She, in the last two games in this April window, looked to be vital, and I think she will be key in the World Cup and will surprise a lot of people. Behind them is a very deep defensive line that the Euros reminded us is one that not to be underestimated. Up top, some of the best and explosive attacking line in the game right now. Diani, Cascarina, Katoto. Obviously, a lot of conversation has calmed down with Katoto now that she's out with an ACL injury, but she is one of the most prolific, well-rounded finishing strikers in the game, and she's only 20. I mean, she's so young and so ridiculously good. Looking at this passing network by She Plots FC on Twitter, highly recommend you check him out. Mark Lambert runs it. Really, really good stuff. But if you were to take a closer look at the passing network until the first substitution for France on the left side here, everybody's involved. You've got Renard, you've got Cascarino, Lossamer. Everybody is involved, and they're involved not so much in a tight area where they're kind of restricted of movement. They're spread out nicely, and they're spread out very evenly within the pitch. It's not too far up high, and it's not far low. It's very much just exactly in the middle where you need it to be. Taletti and Jean-Françoise are the main two players here, but Taletti for me specifically against Canada was absolutely phenomenal, and I think, like I just mentioned, she will be used as a really important key player in that midfield for Renard. She is exactly in the middle of the pitch, connecting with every single player around her. That is mobility with the players around her, and that is allowing your players to be aggressive, but having players behind you to balance it out. It's exactly what Renard loves to play and how he wants to play. Canada was restricted into a lot of back passes because of the aggressive pressing style that France was putting on. They were pretty much shut down in their own half. You can tell Sinclair had to pull back a lot lower than she usually would. Haitama having to drop down as well. And if you even take a closer zoom into the Jesse Fleming, Schmidt, and Grosso area in that Canadian midfield, they're all right beside each other. Like I just mentioned, France loves to have their mobility and restrict the mobility of the other team, and that's again exactly what they're able to do against Canada. Yes, Canada are coming in with a lot of injuries. There's some depth being hit, but the fact that the three players are so close to each other, a lot of back passes, a lot of players having to drop down to help, is what France will do best. And watching these two games, I was genuinely shocked to how fast they were able to tactically move into his style of play. To be able to do this, literally having just worked with this new person, new coaching staff, new everything for just over a week and a half, is quite impressive. There's a World Cup coming in the summer. It's going to be interesting to see if that is a little bit too soon for him, but right after are the Olympics, which are going to be in France. That, for me, is where a lot of the standards are going to be high. That is where they need to put on a show. It's going to be really, really fun and interesting to finally see a new, rejuvenated France. A France that you can cheer on, because you know what? It has been really hard to cheer on for France. I am a big fan of a lot of the players, but I simply couldn't cheer on Diacre, and it's like, I'm happy France would win, but I'm like, am I really happy? Like, I want her to get out of here. So now she's out of here. It's a new environment. No more toxicity in there. It's looking like a bright start, a good new manager in there. It's going to be interesting to see how well he suits them, how well they suit him. For myself, I don't really watch the Men's African Cup. I don't really watch Ivory Coast or Morocco or Saudi Arabia or any of the teams that he's managed, but having sat down over the past few weeks to just look at them, you can tell that he's a very, very great appointment for this job, and I'm very excited to see how it plans out, like I just mentioned. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this. Do you agree with some of the things I said? Do you echo a lot of things that I saw as well? Would love to hear your opinions on this as always. To stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. I will see you later.